Imagine the man who literally wrote the rulebook for modern science, the undisputed father of chemistry. Now, strip away that sterile, two-dimensional figure you read about in your high school textbooks. Picture that exact same man, secretly huddled over a glowing furnace in the dead of night. He is terrified of ghosts. He is desperately trying to turn lead into gold, using a mysterious red powder handed to him by a complete stranger. This is the bizarre, tragic, and utterly brilliant reality of a 17th century genius living a profoundly double life. He was a web of extreme contradictions, a man whose mind revolutionized human understanding, yet who suffered from crippling anxiety. Before we strip away the dry illusions to uncover the secret alchemical obsessions of this brilliant mind, if you are drawn to the hidden corners of history, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share Legendary Lives Unveiled. Because the greatest historical figures always harbor the darkest secrets. To understand the massive contradictions of Robert Boyle, we must start with a boy who had absolutely everything, right until his world literally collapsed. The year is 1627. Robert Boyle was born at Lismore Castle in County Waterford, Ireland, into a level of dynastic wealth that is almost hard to comprehend. His father, Richard Boyle, the great Earl of Cork, had arrived in Ireland with basically nothing. Yet, through shrewd, ruthless real estate acquisitions and political maneuvering during the English colonization of Ireland, the Earl became the richest, most powerful landowner in the entire British Isles. Robert was the 14th child and the 7th son of this sprawling, ruthlessly ambitious aristocratic dynasty. But despite this staggering wealth, the Earl did not swaddle his son in silk. In a highly deliberate, almost Spartan choice, the infant Robert was sent away to be raised by a local Irish peasant woman, known to history only as Nurse Allen. The Earl firmly believed that the simple food, fresh air, and rigorous lifestyle of a peasant upbringing would build physical endurance and toughen his son up. Living with Nurse Allen had an unintended cultural consequence. Robert actually learned to speak Irish before he learned standard English, giving him a profound grounding and a real connection to the earth and the common people that most aristocrats of his era completely lacked. But that grounding was violently interrupted. By the age of 8, the aristocratic molding machinery kicked in. Robert was ripped from that rural life and sent to Eton College in England. Then, at the tender age of 12, he was packed off on a grand tour of Europe, accompanied by his older brother Francis and a highly strict Calvinist tutor named Isaac Marcombs. The young boy traversed the continent. In 1641, they found themselves in Florence, right around the exact time the legendary astronomer Galileo died there. The influence of Isaac Marcombs during this period simply cannot be overstated. He wasn't just drilling Robert in Latin and polite arts. He was laying the bedrock for Boyle's future empirical mindset. Marcombs taught him practical mathematics, geometry, and crucially, introduced him to the highly controversial scientific ideas of the time, specifically Galileo's heliocentric universe and the mathematics of motion. But while Robert's mind expanded across Europe, the geopolitical foundation of his family shattered. The year was 1641, and the Irish Rebellion exploded, a massive, violent Catholic uprising against the Protestant English and Scottish settlers. The great Earl suddenly found himself fighting a literal war. The family fortune was drained almost overnight just to garrison their castles and pay soldiers. Historical records show the Earl writing a desperate, heartbreaking letter to Marcombs, explaining that he could no longer send any money or bills of exchange, as he was entirely consumed by the war effort. Shortly after, in 1643, Richard Boyle died. The pampered prince of the realm, who had left the British Isles with everything, returned to London in 1644 at the age of 17. He was completely destitute, with no inheritance in hand and no family support network. He wandered the streets of London essentially penniless. How does a traumatized teenager go from sleeping rough to inventing modern science? You cannot conceptualize the vacuum of space while you are starving. You need capital to buy furnaces, glass retorts, and raw chemicals. But before we discover who rescued him financially, we must understand what happened to his mind in Europe. Because there was a single, terrifying event on that grand tour that fundamentally rewired his psychology. You must understand the Geneva thunderstorm of 1640. Robert was 13 years old, staying in a dark, unfamiliar room in Switzerland, a stronghold of strict Calvinist theology. In the middle of the night, he was awakened by a thunderstorm of unprecedented violent intensity. The lightning flashes and the concussive thunder were so overwhelming that young Robert genuinely believed the sky was tearing open, and the day of judgment had arrived. Given his intense religious environment, this wasn't just a fear of lightning, it was utter existential terror, a fear of eternal damnation. Trembling in the dark, his Calvinist education magnified his guilt. He felt his young life had been filled with idle, aristocratic pursuits, and realized he wasn't ready to face his Maker. In absolute panic, he made a solemn, desperate vow. If God allowed him to survive the night, he would dedicate his entire life to divine service and strict moral purity. The morning came. The sky cleared, but the fear never left him. He renewed the vow in the daylight just to prove to himself it wasn't only a reaction to the thunder. This textbook trauma response hardened into a lifelong, paralyzing religious scrupulosity. It became the defining architecture of his personality, an obsession with morality, and an intense, almost pathological fear of violating his own conscience. For the rest of his life, he suffered an extreme form of religious anxiety, possessing a deep aversion to swearing oaths, terrified he might inadvertently break a promise to God and damn his soul. This profound religious devotion is what initially drove his intellectual pursuits when he finally got off the streets of London. He didn't turn to chemistry right away. He spent his early 20s trying to construct a perfectly moral framework for his life, writing chivalric romances, moral essays, and theological tracts. But who funded this theological brooding? Who actually got him off the streets? His salvation came in the form of a hidden figure in history, a woman who guided, protected, and bankrolled the father of chemistry, his older sister, Catherine Jones, Lady Ranelagh. Her erasure from the standard history of science is a tragedy. Catherine was 13 years older than Robert. She had been forced into a very unhappy arranged marriage to a churlish, alcoholic aristocrat, Viscount Ranelagh. Yet, she didn't just survive that marriage. She emerged in London as an absolute powerhouse of intellect, politics, and social influence. In an era when women's education was severely restricted, Lady Ranelagh was a formidable mind. A skilled linguist who read Hebrew, her home in Pall Mall wasn't just a lavish residence. It was a vibrant, highly political hub for the greatest intellectuals, parliamentarians, and writers of the 17th century. The poet John Milton was a close friend and confidant, even entrusting the education of his own nephew to her circle. The broke, traumatized, hyper-scrupulous teenage Robert moved in with his brilliant older sister. She put a roof over his head, but she became so much more. She became his primary intellectual collaborator. They eventually built a chemical laboratory right there in her Pall Mall home. For the next 3 decades, they were inseparable. Contemporary archives and correspondence reveal she was actively compounding medicines alongside him in that laboratory. She read, critiqued, and edited the rough drafts of his scientific treatises, and utilized her vast political network to source the rare chemical materials and philosophical instruments he needed. She is basically the mother of chemistry hiding behind the curtain. If they worked hand in glove, why didn't Robert put her name on his published papers? Was he stealing her credit? No, it wasn't malicious theft. In 17th century England, the burgeoning scientific establishment was strictly legally and culturally patriarchal. If a woman's name had appeared as a co-author, the university authorities and the royal court would have immediately dismissed or heavily marginalized the work. Catherine knew the rules of the game. She knew the knowledge literally had to wear a man's name. She willingly utilized her invisible influence because she cared more about the discovery of truth than personal glory. We have concrete proof of her acknowledged influence from the private diaries of men like the brilliant polymath Robert Hooke and the diarist John Evelyn. They frequently recorded that when they went to Pall Mall to discuss physics, pneumatics, or chemistry with Robert Boyle, they were talking just as much with Lady Ranelagh. She was actively participating in the highest levels of scientific discourse. Together, in that Pall Mall laboratory, they were doing something entirely unprecedented and, quite frankly, a little disturbing. They suffocated birds, silenced clocks, and challenged thousands of years of human thought. This was the birth of the experimental method and the creation of the famous air pump. Through Catherine's network, Robert became intimately involved with the Invisible College. Forward-thinking scholars, deeply frustrated with the traditional universities of Oxford, Cambridge, and Paris, which were still completely dominated by Aristotelian scholasticism. In the 1600s, education wasn't about discovery. It was about memorizing what ancient Greek philosophers had decreed. Aristotle had famously decreed that nature abhors a vacuum, that empty space is a physical and logical impossibility, and the universe must be completely full of matter. But the Invisible College, which would eventually be chartered by the king as the world-famous Royal Society, believed in empirical proof. If you claim a vacuum cannot exist, you must prove it mechanically. Hearing rumors of a crude, hand-cranked air pump invented by Otto von Guericke in Germany, Boyle realized he needed a superior machine. He hired a brilliant, mechanically gifted young assistant named Robert Hooke. Together, they engineered a highly complex device they called the Machina Boyleana. Creating an airtight seal without modern rubber was a monumental engineering nightmare. They used a large, thick glass sphere, the receiver, cemented to a sophisticated brass cylinder and a piston mechanism. Hooke used a rack and pinion gear system, sealing the brass joints with sweet olive oil mixed with water, and sealing the glass itself with a special chemical cement called lute, made from beeswax, turpentine, and earth. By turning the crank, the piston physically sucked the air out of the glass receiver. These highly performative, dramatic experiments were publicly witnessed by aristocrats and philosophers. They placed a ticking pocket watch inside, sealed it with lute, and as the air evacuated, the sound of the ticking slowly faded away into total silence. Because they could still perfectly see the watch, they viscually proved that sound requires a physical medium to travel, but light does not. They put a lit candle inside, pumped the air, and watched the flames suffocate and die, proving fire is not an innate element, but requires a physical substance in the air. Then the experiments turned brutal. To prove the biological necessity of air, and more importantly, the existence of the vacuum, they placed living creatures, small birds, mice, and even kittens inside the glass globe. They pumped the air out and watched them collapse and die. By successfully evacuating the air, Boyle was looking right at a vacuum. He was empirically proving Aristotle wrong. But the political stakes were staggering. The Catholic Church and the Protestant establishment had deeply intertwined Aristotelian physics with Christian theology. To question Aristotle was to question the intellectual foundation of European education and the authority of the Church's worldview. Wait, if the Church had married theology to Aristotelian physics, wasn't Robert Boyle risking a Galileo-style inquisition? Galileo was placed under house arrest just a few decades prior for challenging the geocentric model. How did Boyle navigate the deadly politics of completely dismantling the Aristotelian concept of nature? This is exactly where Boyle's genius for diplomacy and his impeccable aristocratic standing came into play. He didn't frame his work as an attack on theology. He framed it as a pure way to appreciate God's creation. Furthermore, he faced fierce philosophical pushback, most notably from Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes, the famous author of Leviathan, completely rejected the air pump. He argued that a vacuum was a logical impossibility, asserting that if there is distance between the two walls of the glass receiver, something must be there to constitute that distance. Hobbes argued that Boyle wasn't creating a vacuum, but merely pulling a finer, invisible fluid through the pores of the glass. He was essentially saying, "Your eyes are deceiving you. My logic is flawless." And Boyle's response to Thomas Hobbes is what truly cements him as the father of modern science. He didn't just argue back with more philosophy. He provided careful, quantitative measurements. He poured liquid mercury into a J-shaped glass tube, trapping a pocket of atmospheric air at the short, sealed end. By pouring more and more mercury into the long end, he increased the physical pressure on the trapped air and meticulously measured how the volume of the trapped air shrank in exact proportion to the weight of the mercury. And there it is, Boyle's law, the absolute principle that the pressure and volume of a gas have an inverse relationship. But what is even more revolutionary than the mathematical law itself is how Boyle chose to present this information to the world. Prior to Boyle, natural philosophers often wrote in obscure, highly guarded Latin, presenting their conclusions as infallible, mystical truths. They wanted to look like wizards. Boyle rejected that entirely. He wrote his findings in clear, highly accessible English, providing agonizingly meticulous details of how he and Robert Hooke built the Machina Boyliana, explicitly encouraging readers to build their own pumps and replicate his work. And most shockingly of all, he published his failures. In the 1600s, you wanted to look like an infallible master of nature. But Boyle comes along and openly writes, "The glass globe fractured under pressure today. The beeswax seal leaked. The bird survived because the pump failed. Here is why I think the mechanics broke down." He was single-handedly establishing the principle of repeatability. He adopted the motto of the Royal Society, nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it. He demanded that experiments be publicly witnessed, meticulously recorded, and independently replicated. He was essentially creating the blueprint for open-source knowledge and the modern scientific method. But here is where the story of Robert Boyle takes a massive, almost unbelievable, contradictory twist. The man championing the scientific method, the man demanding that everything be tested in the light of day, was leading a highly secretive, deeply concealed double life. To understand this twist, we must look at his most famous book, published in 1661, The Skeptical Chemist. In this seminal work, Boyle publicly and ruthlessly ridiculed the vulgar alchemists. He mathematically tore down the ancient Aristotelian idea that the world is made of four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. He also attacked the Paracelsian alchemists who believed everything was made of three mystical principles: salt, sulfur, and mercury. He demanded physical, experimental proof for these magical principles, which they couldn't provide. Instead, Boyle proposed a radical new theory. All matter in the universe is made of tiny, indivisible, neutral particles he called corpuscles. An early, highly accurate version of atomic theory. He publicly separated the rigorous discipline of chemistry from the mystical, secretive world of alchemy. That is the triumphant narrative that historians clung to for centuries. But when modern historians finally did a deep dive into Boyle's private, unpublished archives and his encoded letters, they discovered something staggering. Privately, Robert Boyle was a hardcore, lifelong practicing alchemist. The ultimate champion of the scientific method was actively searching for the philosopher's stone, the mythical substance said to turn base metals into gold and grant eternal life. He engaged in highly secretive correspondence with an underground network of alchemists across Europe and America. Using complex codes, ciphers, and invisible ink, he was particularly influenced by an American alchemist named George Starkey, who wrote under the mysterious pseudonym Irenaeus Philalethes. Boyle even claimed in his private writings to have personally witnessed a transmutation. According to his own account, a traveling adept and alchemical master visited him in secret. The stranger melted down an ounce of base lead in a crucible over a glowing furnace. Then, the stranger handed Boyle a mysterious substance, a heavy, deep red powder that smelled strangely of sulfur and organic matter. Boyle dropped this red powder into the molten lead. 15 minutes later, the crucible cooled, and Boyle claimed the lead had transubstantiated into pure, assayable gold. How did his famous, highly rational friends react to this obsession? Isaac Newton was a contemporary of Boyle, and it is crucial to understand that Isaac Newton was also a deeply committed, secret alchemist. When Boyle actually crossed the line and published a weird, anonymous tract claiming he had successfully degraded gold, turning pure gold into a lesser base metal using an anti-elixir, Newton panicked. Newton wrote a frantic letter to Boyle, urgently warning him to preserve high silence on these alchemical secrets. Newton wasn't worried about the science being wrong. He genuinely feared that if Boyle taught the public how to manufacture or degrade gold, the entire bullion-based economy of Europe would instantly collapse. But Boyle didn't stop. He actually used his immense political influence to lobby the British government to successfully repeal King Henry IV's ancient statute against multiplying gold and silver, just so he could legally attempt to manufacture gold. How do we reconcile this? How does the inventor of corpuscular theory fall for a traveling magician's red powder trick? It looks like hypocrisy to us today, but to Boyle, it wasn't hypocrisy at all. If we look closely at his brilliant belief in corpuscles, it provided the exact logical justification for his belief in alchemy. If everything in the entire universe is made of the exact same neutral, universal building blocks, corpuscles, distinguished only by their shape, size, and motion, then the only difference between a block of heavy lead and a block of shiny gold is the architectural arrangement of those tiny particles. If you have a toy castle made of gray building blocks, you can theoretically take it apart and build a spaceship out of those exact same blocks. If you can find the right chemical tool, a highly active solvent, or perhaps the Philosopher's Stone, you should be able to break down the corpuscles of lead and rearrange them into the geometric structure of gold. To Boyle, alchemy wasn't dark magic. It was highly advanced, applied corpuscular mechanics. He wasn't abandoning his logic. He was following it to its ultimate extreme conclusion, and he wasn't doing it for money. Boyle drew a sharp distinction between experiments that were luciferous, meaning they generated wealth, and those that were luciferous, meaning they generated light and knowledge. Discovering the Philosopher's Stone would be the ultimate, undeniable proof of his corpuscular theory, a way to peek behind the curtain of God's creation. And this obsession with figuring out the unseen rules of God's machine didn't stop at chemistry or physics. Boyle decided to scientifically investigate ghosts. He viewed the universe as a great automaton, a magnificent, intricate clockwork, designed, built, and wound up by God. He spent vast sums of his own money funding translations of the Bible into the Irish language, into Turkish, and even into Native American languages. Yet, he actively collected data on angels, demons, and witches. Boyle firmly believed that proving the existence of spiritual beings was the best empirical evidence for the existence of God. If the universe is just a clock running on mechanical laws of motion and pressure, maybe you don't need a clockmaker anymore. So he thought if he could empirically prove that ghosts or demons interact with the physical world, he could prove that a supernatural realm exists. He literally treated ghost stories like lab data. When a highly publicized account of a violent poltergeist in a French Huguenot household, The Devil of Mascon, was written by a minister named François Perrault, Boyle didn't just accept it. He had the text translated into English and personally cross-examined witnesses who had fled France, looking for physical consistency in the testimonies. Did the entity throw physical stones? Did it speak in a verifiable language? This was driven by a philosophical concept known as volunteerism. Boyle believed that God's will was absolute, unconstrained, and unknowable to human reason. God didn't just create the laws of physics and walk away. He actively sustains those laws by his own will every single second. Because God is completely sovereign, he can choose to temporarily suspend those physical laws whenever he wants. A miracle isn't a violation of nature. It's just the supreme lawmaker deciding to hit the pause button on his own mechanical rules. To Boyle, investigating the natural world was a form of priestly worship. He wrote that the natural philosopher in his laboratory is like a priest in a temple, but carrying that kind of intense internal pressure, constantly analyzing the universe, decoding alchemy, terrified of eternal damnation, took a horrific toll. His biology broke down severely. Throughout his adult life, Robert Boyle suffered from chronic bouts of malaria, excruciating kidney stones, drastically weakening eyesight, and in 1670, when he was just in his early 40s, a severe stroke that left him partially paralyzed. He suffered from severe bouts of melancholy, what we would diagnose as clinical depression today, and complained of intense, uncontrollable, manic fits of imagination and anxiety. he termed his ravings. He refused to seek professional medical help because of a traumatic incident in his childhood when a doctor at Eton accidentally prescribed him a toxic dose of an emetic medicine that nearly killed him. Instead, he relied entirely on his own chemical knowledge. Practicing a form of Paracelsian chemical medicine, he compounded bizarre remedies in the Pall Mall laboratory, using extracts of crushed millipedes, pulverized human bones, and album graecum, which was essentially calcined dog dung. Through all of this immense suffering, the one constant anchor in his life was his sister, Catherine. They had lived together for over 20 years, but in late December of 1691, Lady Ranelagh fell severely ill and passed away. The end of Robert Boyle's life was incredibly poignant and swift, exactly 1 week after Catherine died. On December 31st, 1691, Robert Boyle passed away at the age of 64. While the official cause was related to his declining health, biographers strongly suspect that his physical and psychological system simply collapsed. He effectively died of sheer grief. He couldn't survive in a world without his sister. Before he died, he left his massive collection of chemical, philosophical, and highly secretive alchemical papers to his good friend, the philosopher John Locke, ensuring his empirical legacy would survive. He also left a massive endowment to fund the Boyle Lectures, an annual series of sermons specifically designed to defend the Christian faith against atheism and secular philosophy. Robert Boyle was a physically fragile, incredibly anxious man who possessed the monumental intellectual courage to boldly defy thousands of years of entrenched academic and religious authority. His greatest legacy wasn't just a mathematical formula about gas pressure. It was a cultural revolution. He created the deeply democratic concept of open source knowledge. He demanded that truth shouldn't be locked away by an elite priesthood of scholars, but tested, debated, and verified by the community at large. It leaves us with a highly provocative thought. If Robert Boyle were alive today, in our modern era of lockdown corporate secrets, proprietary pharmaceutical patents, and hidden digital algorithms, would he just be a compliant scientist? Or would he be a whistleblower, leaking the data to the public because he fundamentally believed the truth belongs to humanity? The 17th century open source whistleblower. If this exploration of Robert Boyle's hidden life, his secret alchemy, and his brilliant sister sparked your curiosity, make sure you hit subscribe, leave a like, and share this with a friend who loves history's untold mysteries. There are so many more incredible stories waiting for you, right here on Legendary Lives Unveiled. Keep questioning everything.